form of loyalty to Vale. So she believed. In the late afternoon, Lockley said, "Another 4 or 5 miles, and we ought to be out of the park and on another highway we'll hope won't be blocked by a terror beam. Anyhow, there should be an occasional farmhouse where we can find some sort of civilized food." Jill said hungrily, "Scrambled eggs." "Probably," he agreed. They went on and on. 3 miles, 4, 5, 5.5. They descended a minor slope and came to a hard-surfaced road with tire marks on it and a sign sternly urging care in driving. There were plowed fields in which crops were growing. There was a row of stubby telephone poles with a sagging wire between them. "We'll head west," said Lockley. "There ought to be a farmhouse somewhere near." "And people," said Jill. "I look terrible." He regarded her with approval. "No, you look all right. You look fine." It was pleasing that he seemed to mean it. But immediately she said, "Maybe we'll be able to find out about Vale," agreed Lockley. "But don't be disappointed if we don't. He could have escaped or been freed without everybody knowing it." She said in surprise, "Been freed? That's something I didn't think of. He'd set to work to make them understand that we humans are intelligent and they ought to make friends with us. That would be the first thing he'd think of, and they might set him free to arrange it." Lockley said, "Yes," in a carefully uncommittal tone. Another mile, this time on the hard road. It seemed strange to walk on so unyielding a surface after so many miles on quite different kinds of footing. It was almost sunset now. There was a farmhouse set well back from the road and barely discernible beyond nearby growing corn. The house seemed dead. It was neat enough and in good repair. There were clackings of chickens from somewhere behind it, but it had the feel of emptiness. Lockley called. He called again. He went to the door and would have called once more, but the door opened at a touch. "Evacuated," he said. "Did you notice that there was a telephone line leading here from the road?" He hunted in the now shadowy rooms. He found the telephone. He lifted the receiver and heard the humming of the line. He tried to call an operator. He heard the muted buzz that said the call was sounding, but there was no answer. He found a telephone book and dialed one number after another. Sheriff, preacher, doctor, garage, operator again, general store. He could tell that telephones rang dutifully in remote abandoned places, but there was no answer at all. "I'll look in the chicken coops," said Jill practically. She came back with eggs. She said briefly, "The chickens were hungry. I fed them and left the chicken yard gate open. I wonder if the beam hurts them, too." "It does," said Lockley. He made a light and then a fire, and she cooked eggs which belonged to the unknown people who owned this house and who had walked out of it when instructions for immediate evacuation came. They felt queer, making free with this house of a stranger. They felt that he might come in and be indignant with them. "I ought to wash the dishes," said Jill when they were finished. "No," said Lockley. "We go on. We need to find some soldiers, or a telephone that works." "I'm not a good dishwasher anyhow," said Jill guiltily. Lockley put a banknote on the kitchen table with a weight on it to keep it from blowing away. They closed the house door. They'd eaten fully and luxuriously of eggs and partly stale bread, and the sensation was admirable. They went out to the highway again. "West is still our best bet," said Lockley. "They've blocked the highway to eastward with that terror beam." The sun had set now, but a fading glory remained in the sky. They saw the slenderest, barest crescent of a new moon practically hidden in the sunset glow. They walked upon a civilized road, with a fence on one side of it and above it a single sagging telephone wire that could be made out against the stars. "I feel," said Jill, as if we were almost safe now. All this looks so ordinary and reassuring." "We'd better keep our noses alert," Lockley told her. "We know that one beam comes nearly this far, and probably, no, certainly, crosses this road. There may be more." "Oh, yes," agreed Jill. Then she said, irrelevantly, "I'll bet they do make him a sort of ambassador to our government to arrange for making friends. He'll be able to convince them." Again she referred to Vale. Lockley said nothing. Night was now fully fallen. There were myriad stars overhead. They saw the telephone wire dipping between poles against the sky's brightness. They passed an open gate where another telephone wire led away, doubtless to another farmhouse. But if there was no one at the other end of a telephone line, there was no point in using a phone. There came a rumbling noise behind them. They stared at one another in the starlight. The rumbling approached. "It can't be," said Jill, marveling. "It's a motor," said Lockley. He could not feel complete relief. "Sounds like a truck. I wonder—" He felt uneasiness. But it was absurd. Only human beings would use motor trucks. There was a glow in the distance behind them. It came nearer as the sound of the motor approached. The motor's mutter became a grumble. It was definitely a truck. They could hear those other sounds that trucks always make in addition to their motor noises. It came up to the curve that rounded last. Its headlight beams glared on the cornstalks growing next to the highway. One headlight appeared around the turn, then the other. An enormous trailer-truck combination came bumbling toward them. Jill held up her hand for it to stop. Its headlights shone brightly upon her. Air brakes came on. The giant combination, cab in front, gigantic box body behind, came to a halt. A man leaned out. He said, amazedly, "Hey, what are you folks doing here? Everybody's supposed to be long gone. Ain't you heard about all civilians clearing out from 20 miles outside the park? There's boogers in there. Characters from Mars or somewhere. They eat people." Even in the starlight, Lockley saw the familiar wildlife control markings on the trailer. He heard Jill, her voice shaking with relief, explaining that she'd been at the construction camp and had been left behind, and that she and Lockley had made their way out. "We want to get to a telephone," she added. "He has some information he wants to give to the army. It's very important." Then she swallowed. "And I'd like to ask if you've heard anything about a Mr. Vale. He was taken prisoner by the creatures up there. Have you heard of his being released?" The driver hesitated. Then he said, "No, ma'am, not a word about him. But we'll take care of you two. You must have been through plenty. Judd, you go get in the trailer back yonder. Make room for these two folks up on the front seat." He added explanatorily, "There's cases and stuff in the back, ma'am. You two folks climb right up here alongside of me. You sure must have had a time." The door on the near side of the truck cab opened. A small man got out. Silently, he went to the rear of the trailer and swung up out of sight. Jill climbed into the open door. Lockley followed her. He still felt an irrational uneasiness, but he put it down to habit. The past few days had formed it. "We've been carting stuff for the soldiers," explained the driver as Lockley closed the door behind him. "They keep track of where that terror beam is working, and they tell us by truck radio, and we dodge it. Ain't had a bit of trouble. Never thought I'd play games with Martians. Did you see any of 'em? What sort of critters are they?" He slipped the truck into gear and gunned the motor. Truck and trailer together began to roll down the highway. Lockley was irritated with himself because he couldn't relax and feel safe, as this development seemed to warrant. Later, he would wonder why he hadn't used his head, in this as in other matters during the few days just past. He plainly hadn't. End of chapter 6.